You're with Clement Manyathela.
702.
All right, so we were meant to speak to the Ombudsman for IDEC, the retired Judge Takalani Rolinga, who briefed the media yesterday on the progress towards establishing the IDEC Oversight Office. So we're going to reschedule that interview because they contacted us in the previous hour and said something has come up for Judge Rolinga, so unable to meet his obligation this morning to be with us. But what we're going to do now is talk about an equally important story. I was reading this before coming to work this morning. It's a story by AmaBhungane, and they are reporting about an explosive High Court application by suspended Inspector General of Intelligence Imtiaz Fazel, which confirms how central the now suspended Police Minister Senzo Mchunu's office was to the series of investigations and leaks that led both to the Madlanga Commission and to the unprocedural, I should say, and likely unconstitutional suspension of the Inspector General. So in essence here, the IG is arguing that the now suspended Minister of Police, Senzo Mchunu, drew him into crime intelligence wars. Orrin Singh is one of the investigative journalists that worked on this. He is an investigative journalist with AmaBhungane, joining us now on the line. Orrin, thank you so much for your time. Good morning.
Good morning, Clement. Thanks for having me.
So how crucial is this link between Senzo Mchunu and the instruction, the suggestion or instruction he gave to Imtiaz Fazel to investigate these issues at crime intelligence, and of course the role of the presidency minister Kumbuzo Nchaveni and the president in all of this? What's the link?
It's pivotal in terms of Mchunu's role in this entire thing, Clement, because if we recall, the Inspector General of Intelligence, Imtiaz Fazel, was suspended in October last year, officially by the President. And at the time, and via what's listed in his court papers, it suggests that this was due to possible leaks and political interference around leaks that were made public regarding crime intelligence, procurement of certain properties, and also the appointment of the Neo Mokweli, that brigadier within crime intelligence that we know Dumisani Kumalo and 6 others were arrested on charges by IDEC. And I think it's important that Imtiaz Fazel's papers for the first time show us that Senzo Mchunu had instructed him within the Office of the Inspector General of Intelligence last year, in January last year, to look into the appointment, number 1, of Mokwele, and also to look into the procurement of these hotels and properties by crime intelligence. And that's important because it essentially shows us that Mchunu had lit the spark for these investigations to be conducted by the Inspector General of Intelligence. And I think the picture that had been painted following the suspension of Imtiaz Fazel was that he was responsible for the leaks that made public the procurement process of crime intelligence, getting those properties. And one such property is very important, and that's the Verose Boutique Hotel in Pretoria North, because that property in itself was being used, as we understand, as a sort of base for members from the Gauteng Counterintelligence Ops or GCI Ops teams, as well as members from the PKTT during their investigations. So Mchunu's role in all of this is central to why the Inspector General went in and began investigating. He also says that he received, following the instructions from Mchunu to investigate such things, he received more information from members of the public as well as members of Parliament. So I think it's important to establish that Imtiaz Fazel didn't sort of just suck this investigation out of his thumb, but was directed and pointed in a direction by the suspended Minister of Police, Senzo Mchunu, to go and sniff here and look into this for me.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Do we know the reason specifically why Imtiaz Fazel was suspended, and where are we with that?
That's really important as well, because I think we're almost 2 years later since his suspension, and he himself still hasn't been provided reasons as to why he was suspended. I think the reasons that have been presented to him by the acting Director General of the State Security Agency, Tony Msimanga, as well as the Minister in the Presidency, Kumbutso Ntshavheni, are very scant. He's not been given proper reasons. He's only been told that the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence are investigating his conduct and the possible leaks of information to members of the public as well as the media. But as of yet, despite his numerous requests, even to the president himself, for them to provide more or elaborate reasons regarding his suspension, 2 years later or a year later, he still hasn't had answers. And we as the media ourselves don't have answers because obviously we're relying on what he's being presented in his court papers.
Got you. So what is the suggestion here, especially to those, specifically the accusation that he leaked some documents about crime intelligence? Is the suggestion here that he may have been the one that leaked the documents to Fadil Adams, for instance, who then went and opened the case with the police? Is that the link that they're making from what you've seen?
I think it's important to look at the timeline of events that have unraveled since the murder of Arman Swat, and I think that's the pivotal turning point in everything here, and that was in April 2024. Because following the murder of Arman Swat, we saw the establishment of GCI Ops, as well as the involvement in the PKTT, from the PKTT investigating that murder. But, fast forward, it suggests that there may have been leaks from elsewhere. And I think the minister's office, and that being the suspended minister of police, Senzo Mchunu, his office could well likely have also been involved in the leaking of information. Possibly his chief of staff, Nkabinde, whose name has popped up several times. He's appeared before, I think, the ad hoc commission as well as the Madlanga commission as well, or not the Madlanga, but the ad hoc committee. And I think it's for us to come out and definitively say that the leaks came from the Inspector General's office is unfair, because the Inspector General himself has been trying to get answers to these questions and proof that if this is the case, that I'm being investigated for possible leaks and political interference regarding the sensitive, top secret, confidential information pertaining to crime intelligence, can I be furnished with the proof? And as of yet, he hasn't. But I think, since we've seen certain actors and characters, such as Paul O'Sullivan, in certain interviews he has done, he's been privy himself to information regarding these leaks prior to them actually coming out. And in one interview specifically that he did, he suggested that he had engaged with someone within the office of the Minister of Police. And I think, without definitively saying that it is Cedric Nkabinde, I think a lot of people are kind of looking at him, given the things that have come out in the ad hoc commission, but also during his time as IPID. Cedric Nkabinde has been seen as a central character in a lot of the way information has been passed to and from certain important characters in this whole thing.
Yeah. And then enter Kumbutso Ntshavheni, the minister in the presidency, because Fazel reveals that there was a letter that he sent to President Cyril Ramaphosa where he explains that there was correspondence communicated by the minister in the presidency, Kumbutso Ntshavheni, about the need to extend/delay the duration of this investigation he was undertaking so that, to allow the work of the Gauteng counterintelligence operations that necessitated the purchase of this hotel you mentioned to be concluded. And my understanding is that Fazel was then surprised because Ntshavheni is the minister in the presidency responsible for state security agency but has no jurisdiction over crime intelligence.
Yeah, I think that's very important, an important topic to actually hone in on and look at, Clement, because essentially Fazel is claiming in a nutshell that Ntshavheni had been basically dipping into his portfolio and placing roadblocks in his way of investigating certain things that he had been tasked to investigate, where she's in charge of a completely separate portfolio in that of the State Security Agency rather than crime intelligence, which would fall under the Minister of Police. So I think Ntshavheni's role in everything is crucial to some of the stumbling blocks that Fazel had actually had to overcome during the course of this investigation that he had been tasked to look into. But more importantly, so I think he raises some very important aspects of where she failed to assist the Office of the Inspector General of Intelligence, and that is in terms of actually capacitating the Office of the Inspector General, because Imtiaz Fazel is quite scathing in his court papers when he states that to date the OGI or the OIGI is only 44% capacitated. They are facing extreme under-resources and staff shortages, of which Kumbutso Ntshavheni is responsible of capacitating that office. But he also raises the point that he believes that shouldn't be the case, that the minister and the presidency shouldn't hold that responsibility in terms of capacitating his office. But out of, I think, 6 senior appointments that he suggested upon taking office in 2022, she had only granted him 1 senior appointment. And so there's definitely a massive role that she has played in all of this, in terms of I wouldn't say preventing his investigation, but in terms of being a part of the whole scenario of him getting information that he needed to further the investigation into these hotel procurements by crime intelligence, as well as the appointments of Dineo Makwele.
Yeah, but do we know of any link though between Fazel, the Inspector General of Intelligence, and people like Firoz Khan? Because at the Madlanga Commission, when the KZN Police Commissioner Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi appeared, he alluded to a conspiracy between the Crime Intelligence Deputy Head, Firoz Khan, and Fazel in allegedly, as you said, coordinating the leakage of confidential information. But is there any link? Is he, the IGI, somehow linked to, Firoz Khan or Mo Saeed?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we reveal in our article, that Mohammed Saeed, who is a tobacco tycoon and the CEO of Collins, is a relative of Imtiaz Fazel's, and they are related. At the time, we had received information that Imtiaz Fazel was the brother of Mohammed Saeed's mother, making Saeed his nephew. But they both disputed this when we contacted them for comment. Imtiaz Fazel telling us that no, he's only a distant relative, and that he didn't feel at any stage he needed to disclose this relation because, first and foremost, Mohammed Saeed himself, while being in the media for negative reasons, has not been charged criminally of any offense. And secondly, they don't have any sort of communication, so he didn't feel the need to disclose this. And that they don't have any sort of relationship that overlaps in the course of his work as well as Mr. Saeed's work. Saeed himself also confirming that and echoing the same thing that Fazel had told us, that they're distant relatives. But coming back to your question, whether Fazel may have had any links to Khan, I think given the relation to Saeed, there could well be a link to Khan there. Those are questions we hadn't put directly to Fazel. But given what we've seen at the commission and come out at the commission, I think last week or the week before, whereas Khan and Saeed were kind of in constant communication around a specific tender for COVID-19 procurement, but also around the certain questions that Saeed had facilitated in putting to the former Inspector General of Intelligence, Dr. Dintwe. It's safe to say that there was a relationship between Saeed and Khan. And I think as a result of that, we could well say that there was a possible relationship between Saeed and Khan, Imtiaz Fazel and Khan himself.
So who's providing oversight now when you've got Inspector Generals being suspended? Like, is now oversight suspended for even institutions like the State Security Agency? I
think that's probably one of the biggest talking points out of this article and this investigation, Clement, is that at present, the Inspector General of Intelligence is meant to be this watchdog over all intelligence services in South Africa, and given his suspension, it raises serious questions about accountability and oversight. At present, given that he's suspended, there is no body that is responsible for oversight within the intelligence structures. But even prior to his suspension, I think it's important to note that Imtiaz Fazel had been looking into several other investigations. For example, into defense intelligence, the docking of the Lady R vessel in Simonstown. And that vessel at that time in December 22 was related or alleged to have been carrying arms for Russia's and Ukraine war, despite an investigation by South Africa finding otherwise. But he had been tasked by the president himself to look at whether what SSA's involvement was in that saga, and whether they had any role to play in the docking of Lady R and so forth. Imtiaz Fazel also highlights that he received immense pushback from the state security agency themselves in actually assisting with investigations that he was tasked to look into. So, it's important that we know that the Inspector General of Intelligence in this democracy plays a crucial role in holding intelligence structures which ordinary South Africans and citizens aren't made privy to, given the top secret and confidentiality of that information and those investigations. But he is the one that is meant to hold them to account. And without him being there, without him having his security clearance, which was withdrawn just months before he was suspended, it poses a real risk and danger to our democracy and the country as a whole, because essentially it's a free-for-all. Between October and now that he's been suspended, no one's going to be held to account, and we don't know what's going on behind closed doors.
Yeah, and knowing what we know about how often crime intelligence and its processes can be abused, this is not a time for there to be such a vacuum created. Orrin Singh, thank you for joining us. He's an investigative journalist with AmaBhungane. They published quite an explosive report this morning detailing the affidavit by the Inspector General of Intelligence showing how the Minister of Police, who's now suspended, Senzo Mchunu, drew him into the crime intelligence wars that are now playing out. It's 28 after 10.
Hanging out with Clement
on 702.
Let's walk the talk.